scholars. In other words, it's an institution that gives you time to think outside your daily obligations as teachers, postdocs, or administrators. So as I said, I mean, this is a project that is supported by the Getty Foundation in the United States. Yesterday we finished the opening conference. Some of you were present, or at least part of it. It was a very nice and promising beginning of this venture. The two directors of the program are Dimitris Plantzos and Alec Niculescu, and they are the people responsible for conceptualizing this whole idea and for devising the three topics of this school. Milena Verzonovtseva, yes, who is waving now, is going to be in charge for the logistical part of it. I really regret that we couldn't meet in person in Sofia. As you know very well, our proposal last year to postpone it by 1 year was made with the hope that by 1 year we would have long forgotten what it was. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and we didn't want to risk to postpone it one more time, either to the fall or to the next year, because we're still living in this uncertainty. This is really regrettable, because this kind of events very much rely on also on the informal communication between people. But somehow we hope that on the one hand we'll manage to create some good vibes and some good connections already in this way. And with the first opportunity we have, we'll bring you also together physically and really. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Dimitris Plantzos, who is going to moderate today's sessions. Dimitris.
Thank you, Diana. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you, even through my computer screen. So this is the official inauguration of our first spring school in a series of 3. Its title is The Impact of the Political on Archaeological Research, and I, for one, am excited and look forward to work with you this week and discuss this problem in many interrelated facets of this question. So as you know, there's 3 days of lectures waiting ahead of us, and then a workshop and more discussions, and so I think we will all, by the end of it, we will get wiser in our field. Before I give the floor to Alec Niculescu, who's going to offer the first 2 sessions, the first 2 lectures, let me remind everyone that each slot is 90 minutes, divided almost well, equally between a presentation by the senior speaker, and then an open discussion with the junior participants, which is you. Originally, when we thought this would be in an actual auditorium, we also planned for a break. So 40 minutes presentation, 40 minutes discussion, and a 10-minute break in between. We'll see how it goes. I suppose it's feasible and perhaps desirable to have a 5-minute break at the end of the lecture, just to sort of change the position of our feet in front of our computer. Before all this, however, let's introduce ourselves. You know who we are, but perhaps we can, even though, you know, as Diana said, Alec and I had the privilege or the burden of doing many things, among which was to choose you out of the applications we had. But now it's time for you perhaps to remind us who you are. So perhaps I can ask each and every one of you to present themselves by, you know, just 1 minute, very, very, very short presentation, who they are and where they come from. Are we going to do this alphabetically or how? I don't know. also because the screens tend to, to change focus all the time. So, or perhaps I can take my participant list, which is here, and I can ask you to speak. So first, well, after Alec is Polina Florianovic.
Yes, thank you. My name is Paulina Florianovic. I'm quite old to be a PhD candidate, but let me explain why. I did my master's degree in archaeology of late medieval and modern times at Warsaw University 20 years ago. And I started to work in all sorts of institutions, not in the area of research. There was no such possibility at that time. But I've worked for the past 20 years in heritage management and a little bit further in heritage policy making. I started with the Soros Foundation's network that some of you, I'm sure, know. And then I moved to all kinds of state agencies. For some time, I've been the Director General for the National Heritage Agency in Poland. And for the past 5 years, yeah, it's been 5 years already, I've been working as Director of the Cultural Heritage Department at the Polish Ministry of Culture. And within the scope of my responsibility, it's not archaeology, unfortunately, but a lot of other interesting things. I'm responsible for the entire museum sector, memorial sites, war cemeteries, graves, and stuff like that, plus remembrance policy, including I've been in charge of the program for the centenary of Poland regaining its independence that took place in 2018. So a few years ago, I decided that I would like to go back to research after all, at least in some part of my professional activity, and decided to combine my interest in archaeology that hasn't stopped with what I've learned over the years. And the area of my research is how archaeology and politics are mixed, but just to be on the safe side, and since I'm working for the administration, I don't refer to present times, more to historical times. So the theme of my dissertation is the approach, the attitude of Polish archaeology and Polish archaeologists towards two totalitarian systems, Nazism and Stalinism. So in short, that's it.
Thank you. Burak?
Good morning, everyone. This is Burak from Middle East Technical University, Settlement Archaeology Department, Ankara, Turkey. I studied archaeology and history of architecture in Istanbul Technical University and Mimar Sinan University, which is also in Istanbul. Then I deported to Ankara for my PhD thesis, PhD study. My PhD project involves the appreciation or appropriation of the cultural heritage of Aegean Turkey, a comparison between the attitudes of local Turks and immigrant Greeks of the population exchange after the Greco-Turkish War.
Nice. Anastasia Vergaki.
Had a problem with my internet connection, and I'm very afraid that it might happen again. I was a PhD student in archaeology and prehistoric archaeology in the National and Capodistrian University of Athens. I obtained my PhD title last January. I have participated in many interdisciplinary excavations, and I am currently working as, I am offering my secretarial and scientific support to a postgraduate program in our department. And I am currently trying to form a postdoc proposal in order to continue in a postdoc level my studies.
Thank you. Natalia Kozic. I hope I'm pronouncing all these correctly.
It's closer, but don't worry. Chosic, but it's okay. No, it's all right. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to express gratitude to organizers for organizing this gathering, and I'm very keen to talk and discuss on all these topics. Without further ado, I am Natalia Chosic. I'm archaeologist and senior preventive conservator. In past 10 years, I've been dealing with different kinds of heritage management topics. Aside from that, I'm also PhD candidate at University of Belgrade, at Department of Archaeology. And my thesis falls into the realm of history of ideas in science and history of archaeology and critical heritage studies. It deals with the role of discovery and authority in production of knowledge in archaeology. And the case study I'm working on is Lepenski Vir, the same site I will be presenting on this spring school.
Thank you. And now to Cosmin Minea. Well, we meet again after what has been a month since the last conference we were together.
Yes.
That was in Athens. This is in Sofia, and yet we haven't moved.
Yes. Hello to everyone. Indeed. We've been together to a conference about modern heritage. And this is what I also study mostly. So I finished my PhD at the University of Birmingham with a thesis on the restoration and promotion of historical monuments in modern Romania, mainly 19th century. So I'm not an archaeologist, rather an art historian. But I think the way historical architectural monuments have been restored, treated, in the 19th century has a lot of kind of common points and a lot of intersections with archaeology. And I hope I'll show some of them in my presentation. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm currently affiliated with New Europe College in Bucharest. I'm a postdoctoral fellow on a project that will end this summer, which is about writings of art history in Central and Eastern Europe in the 19th and 20th century. So kind of art the analysis of art historiography. And I'm also kind of conceiving and looking to apply to other postdoctoral fellowships. Thank you.
Thank you. Now to Ivo Strahilov.
Hello, everyone. I'm also not an archaeologist. I hold my PhD in cultural studies, and I'm currently an assistant professor at the Department of Cultural Studies at Sofia University. But although I'm not an archaeologist, I'm still very interested in the social life of things, of collections, and in the process of construction of knowledge and all these entanglements between different schools and paradigms or whatever that is. And I find it particularly fruitful and interesting to be among all of you, because from my experience, it's been really hard to talk with archaeologists, especially here in Bulgaria, from that perspective of like social construction of knowledge. So yeah, I look for it with big attention.
Thank you. Now to Clary Yaniri.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clary Yaniri, and I also come from Athens. I am also in the group of non-archaeologists, since I have a background in cultural communication and technology. I also hold an MA in museum studies in the Department of History and Archaeology, and currently I'm towards the end of my PhD, focusing on public archaeology of mountain and remote areas. And the last couple of years, I'm leading the archaeological ethnography project of the University of Athens in East Crete. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. And Zenta Broca Leis. You're still muted. Okay. that didn't go very well. Shall we hear from Milena Stamperova, and then perhaps Zenta, you can log out and log in again. Milena?
Miglena, hello.
Miglena,
everyone.
okay.
I'm Miglena, and I'm an archaeologist, PhD since 2012. But my archaeological career had some crucial moments. So I couldn't find Italians call this posto fisso. I couldn't find a fixed place, and I was working for 4 years, a job that had nothing to do with archaeology. But during these 4 years, I was working also as a tour guide with Italian. So I could get a different point of view on the cultural heritage. And now I work at the National Archaeological Museum at Sofia 1 year now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Zenta now is ready.
Hello. Oh, is it possible to hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm really sorry. I'm from a really far corner of Europe, from Latvia. I am a PhD student in the University of Latvia in the Faculty of History and Philosophy. So basically, I am a historian. My basic education is a historian, so I am extremely happy to see more archaeologists like in this event. So yeah, and I am also a museum worker. I work in a local museum with the archaeological collection, which is made in the 19th century. So the 19th century archaeology is a thing that I'm interested in. But my PhD is about the history of archaeological thoughts in Latvia in general. So from this very 19th century till this day. So theoretical and such kind of questions I'm interested in about the archaeology.
Thank you. And last but not least, Ona Dihel.
Hello to everyone. My name is Juana.
Oana. Okay.
Juana, yes. But you can call me Juana, or it doesn't matter. I'm already used. I'm currently PhD on University of Babeș-Bolyai from Cluj-Napoca. For a long time, my specialization was Second Iron Age, but together with my coordinator, we decided to switch in something new. So on PhD, I'm doing the public archaeology concept, and our hope is to design a program from Romania, adapt to Romanian realities about public archaeology. And also I'm specialized in cultural heritage legislation, because I also finished the law faculty. Currently, I'm one of the archaeologists in charge with the archaeological research in an UNESCO monument from Câlnic, that it's a peasant fortification and a church. And we hope to finish very soon the excavation and be published all the discoveries that we made that are very important and nice. So I don't know if people will have more questions. With time, we will.
Well,
say more.
I think we'll
much.
get to know each other more in the next days. But we also have with us two of our speakers of this workshop, Bettina Arnold and Susanne Greenwald. I don't know if you just like to say hello. We're going to present you officially when time comes. But since we're here, perhaps we can hear your voice.
Sure. Can you actually hear my voice? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I think I've got the microphone set up properly now. Excellent. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in the Spring School. As everybody else has already indicated, it would have been obviously much nicer to be able to meet you all in person, but hopefully that will happen at some point in the future. And my own background is actually also a bit mixed, I suppose you could say. I'm as interested in the history of archaeology as I am specifically in the early Iron Age, so pre-Roman Iron Age of Europe. And my actual PhD research was conducted in Germany on an Iron Age context, which continues as an interest of mine. But it was largely as a result of a seminar that I took when I was a graduate student at Harvard with John Mulvaney, who is maybe not familiar to most of you. He was the father of Australian archaeology. He's no longer alive, unfortunately, but he taught a class during his year as a visiting professor at Harvard entitled Who Owns the Past? And when I took that course, one of only 7 students to take it, all of whom were working in the old world, which is interesting because, of course, you know, the program mostly focused on North American archaeology and Central American archaeology. And given what eventually happened with the passage of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act in 1990, you would have thought there would have been more people actually in that seminar from the New World context. But anyway, and I chose to focus on Germany because that was where I was doing my field work. And at the time, the collection of material that I was working on was at the University of Tübingen. So I thought, well, I'll see whether I can find a way to sort of investigate the way that archaeology was in some way compromised or manipulated by the National Socialists, seeing that that was sort of a logical connection. And I just assumed there would be plenty of secondary source material in German on that topic, and discovered fairly quickly, and you have to understand this was a really long time ago. I'm also very old, so we heard that from previous speaker, and discovered pretty quickly that that was not the case. So using primary source material in the US as well as in Germany, I began investigating that topic as a sort of sideline. So this intersection for me between archaeology and politics has really sort of developed more organically because I'm not a historian. I've sort of had to acquire some of those skills. But I also have a very strong interest in museums, which may not be obvious from my CV. We have a museum studies program here at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee that I've been actively involved with for many years. And so that aspect of heritage kind of management also interests me. So I think from my perspective, just based on what I can see of the presentations that will be coming up this week, just about all of it is of interest. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to contribute something to the conversation on at least several of those metrics. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Susanne?
Good morning, everyone. I'm here in Berlin, in the middle of nowhere. No, I'm an archaeologist and an historian. I made a double degree, and I'm specialized in history of archaeology and in the history of practices to generating knowledge in archaeology. I made my PhD about the history of archaeology of fortified settlements in the middle of Germany. And it was not so much about to investigate the relation between science and politics. I'm more interested in, for me, history of archaeology is a way of Quellenkritik. It's a typical German term, and it means you check all the time your sources and your methods. And I think to do it with a historical perspective, it widens your perspective. It shows you the mechanisms. I think just to concentrate on a dictatorship or so, it shows you just a short slide of development and of time. And so I decide I start with the beginning. And so I started with the early 19th century. Okay, and since the last years, I'm working as an independent researcher with different departments of heritage management in different research institutions and make projects about history of archaeology. And the last project I prepared, and now I'm waiting for the okay or the bed, is about how archaeological museums present our idea of prehistoric power and politics in museums, how we present, or how archaeologists presented our idea of power and of kingdom, of all these ideas of ancient power in museums, and what kind of relation between current politics and presentations in the museum I can find, and how can I explain it. That's the idea of my project. And right now I'm working about some famous old German excavations, and I'd like to check how the old guys teach archaeology at an excavation to students in the late 1920s and early 1930s, how it starts, all these field schools and spring schools like this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We look forward to your contributions. And now for the main event of this morning, we're going to hear from Dr. Gheorghe Alexandru Niculescu, this program's co-director. He will offer his first lecture in a series of two, titled "The Politics We're Trained to Ignore." Dr. Niculescu is a senior researcher at the Vasil Parvan Institute of Archaeology. He has a degree from the University of Bucharest and a PhD in history. He teaches archaeological theory at the University of Bucharest as well. He has published on ancient ethnic phenomena and on the impact of nationalism on archaeological research. He has published research on the politics of cultural heritage in Romania and its impact on the conservation and visibility of the artifacts, and he's currently working on the global asymmetries of archaeological research and on the properties of typological thinking and its flattening consequences on the perception of the artifacts. And this is something that we discussed in the conference at some point. Alec, you have your 40 to 45 minutes, and we're all listening. And after that, we'll have a quick break before the discussion.
Good morning. I stopped giving lectures at the University of Bucharest 15 years ago because seminars are flexible and less imposing. In my country, the authority of the teachers and of the professors is the main obstacle to the advancement of knowledge. But in these circumstances, with little time available, lectures are the only choice. I hope you will not accept what I say as true without careful consideration. If what I will say during the lecture is not clear, for whatever reasons, bad English or anything else, please stop me. I will try to do better. During the discussions, you can ask questions and comment on the lecture. If your understanding of politics and archaeological research contradicts what you will hear from me, please do not hesitate to present your views. That is very useful. Most accounts of the impact of politics on archaeology examine past research and circumstances, implying that they are now something very different. I will talk more about the present than about the past. Well, I will talk more about the recent past than about the distant one, knowing that my account is influenced by politics. You might see that better than I can, so I will be grateful to those of you who, during the discussions, will point out the issues that are misrepresented because of that. One way to start our discussion about politics and archaeology would be to define them. There are a lot of definitions we could use, but My purpose is not to put this lecture under the sign of authority, quite the opposite. My purpose is to explore what happens when reasoning is replaced with obedience to authorities, be they political or scientific. The definitions I will use will not say what are politics and archaeology or what they should be. They are working definitions. That is, they are conceived for a particular purpose. And I do not plan to look for confirmations in order to develop them into authoritative definitions. They are tools for examining the relations between power and knowledge. This requires to avoid limiting politics to the political field and archaeology to one of the currently active traditions of research. In what follows, I will use politics as referring to relations of domination and submission, legitimized by claiming that they support some form of higher good. To give you an example, in his autobiography, a philosopher, Willard van Orman Quine, says that there are two kinds of people in the academic world. One can want, I quote, one can want to be a scientist because he wants to see himself as a Darwin or an Einstein. One can want to be a scientist because he's curious about what makes things tick. In my view, the first kind does politics. I will not restrict to politics to what state institutions do, because there are relations of this kind of politics, the state politics, and the politics that exists outside them, something noticed a long time ago by Michel Foucault. And I will try to share. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So, for some reason, I cannot see it. So the text is in French. I assume many of you know French. That's why I have given this quotation in French. I have problems seeing it, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. I can make a translation, but I cannot make a good translation because I cannot see all the text. I can see only parts of it, so I translate what I see. The idea of the text is that the relations between people, between men and women, between those who know and those who don't, between parents and children in the family, are power relations. So there are thousands of power relations everywhere, small conflicts, and these are related to the great powers of the state, and to the what he names great class domination. So we have to take into account this connection, because the great power, what is usually conceived as big politics, is linked with small politics. By archaeology, I understand any scientific research that examines artifacts for the purpose of understanding those who created and use them, and that generates knowledge about them. I know this definition is flawed because there are disciplines who do the same thing. Art history, material culture studies, to some extent, science and technology studies. I will not try to delimitate archaeology from them because you are archaeologists, so you have representations that are shaped by this discipline, not by the other two. I was wrong here. The definition I propose is very comprehensive. It includes interest for the distant past as well as interest for the recent past. It also includes traditions of archaeological research developed as historical subdisciplines and traditions in which archaeology is a social science. As you may have noticed, there is an asymmetry between the understandings of politics and archaeology I propose. Politics is not a science, and it does not make sense to include in it political science or political philosophy because most politicians ignore them. Archaeology is a scientific discipline, and its traditions of research have developed ways of thinking that are more or less reflexive. Another asymmetry coming from my definition is that there is no archaeology in politics, no scientific examination of material culture can be expected from it, but there is plenty of politics in archaeology, as we will see. I was born in a world in which politics was more important than our lives. Those who represented the state were also Communist Party officials, claimed that they knew better than anyone how and what to think and to do. There was no public opposition to such claims, but there was resistance because what the official said was frequently and obviously untrue, and because there was a gap between the superior knowledge they claimed to possess and their limited intellectual abilities. Some of them were not able to speak Romanian properly, starting with the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. A joke made Charles de Gaulle, who visited Romania in 1968 and said a few words in Romanian to tell Ceausescu that Romanian was a difficult language. Ceausescu answered, "Don't I know it?" Power was perceived as opposed to knowledge, and cultivating knowledge as resistance to power and politics. Many of us imagine that in the democratic West, things look differently. As far as we could tell, life was much better in the West than in Romania, and those who went to the universities discovered that the best knowledge also comes from the West. Choosing knowledge seemed to entail not having any hope of becoming a person with power, just as being a party official seemed to limit drastically what someone would hope to know. Choosing to be a researcher was at the same time choosing knowledge and escaping from the pressures of the party officials. And archaeology with esoteric knowledge about objects being something that no party official would care to mention, the long excavation campaign seemed a way to get away from politics, despite the fact that archaeologists had to face ideological pressures for providing accounts of national genealogy. We paid little attention to the fact that some university professors who were not party officials had power, nonetheless, and to pay attention to the fact that some Communist Party leaders had an interest for the acquisition of knowledge, of high quality knowledge, of elite knowledge, not of that delivered to the population. There was a university of the Communist Party, the Ștefan Gheorghe Academy, in whose library recent philosophical and social science literature was to be found, not available in other libraries. When I was a student in the 1970s, we were all able to separate political courses and seminars, scientific socialism, and so on, from truly academic ones. There was a general mistrust in the categorizations coming in the 1950s, which described Western science as bourgeois science. During my first years at the Bucharest Institute of Archaeology, I learned who were those few archaeologists who supported the political establishment, and I learned also to trust the rest and their capacity to do scientific work, not affected by political reasons. Even when they made compromises by introducing, especially in the introductions and conclusions, things that were meant to please the political establishment. As one of my colleagues used to say, from time to time, we have to play the violin. But those compromises were deliberate, so easy to detect, and we all thought they do not have consequences for the value of scientific work. Just as now, it happened, just as now many archaeologists write in the applications for getting grants, things in which they do not believe, but which appear to them necessary for funding their research. However, the scientific was considered better than the political only when local scientific knowledge was compared with knowledge associated with a miserable political regime in which we lived. Otherwise, politics was considered more important than scientific knowledge. So even if our heroes were not the communist leaders of the time or from the past, but Western politicians like Winston Churchill or Konrad Adenauer, monarchs like Napoleon or Friedrich the Great, ancient rulers like Alexander the Great and Caesars. The courses in the history department gave them their due, sometimes asserting that we have to recognize the importance of personalities, something that was not Marxist, but fully compatible with the personality cult of Ceausescu, who was then gaining momentum. After the fall of the communist regime in 1991-92, I spent 1 year in Tucson at the University of Arizona, teaching in the history department and auditing courses and seminars in the anthropology departments, where the archaeologists were. The dominant attitude towards politics was radically different and shaped by the conviction that doing science is much better than doing politics, that scientific knowledge is better than political knowledge, and simply that scientists are better human beings than politicians. Not watching the news was widespread. CNN, to which I dreamed of having access in Romania, was baptized chicken and noodle news. Critical and dismissive positions were frequent. One day, the head of the history department, who otherwise did not show much interest for my presence there, grabbed my arm, something very unusual in Tucson, and as far as I know, in the rest of the United States, and told me, pointing at a very elegant young man who was about to exit the building of the department. If you want to see an idiot, look at this one. She's leaving the department to become an advisor for Senator De Conchi. After watching on TV the debates between the Democratic candidates for the presidency in '92, I told someone from the anthropology department how disappointed I was by the intellectual level of the interventions. He answered me, somewhat surprised by what I told him, "What did you expect from politicians?" One of the candidates, John Kerry, came to the campus and I received, like all the teaching staff probably, an invitation to his speech. I did not plan to go, but so it happens that I was able to see him as I was walking through the campus. He was delivering his speech on the stairs of the biology department, accompanied by 2 assistants, to no more than 5 auditors and 2 passers-by who, like me, stopped for a minute or two to listen. I did not make inquiries while I was in Tucson about the reasons of this distrust in politics, but one piece of information showed me some light on what was supporting the autonomy of the research. One of the professors told us something very unusual, how much he made in a year. And it was with 15% less than what the President of the United States made at that time. As in Romania, there was confidence in the autonomy of scientific knowledge, and measures were taken not to let politicians, the academic world, something that happens a lot in Romania. When the leaders of the university had an interest to accommodate some politicians and academic ambitions, they offered only courses which did not figure in the required list and were not included in the local schemes for academic promotion. The post-processualist critique of American archaeologists sold to big corporations was indignantly rejected. Ian Hodder was one of the critics, and it is instructive to know that he was 20 years later subjected to similar critiques because of the money taken from big companies such as Visa for his Çatalhöyük excavation, a very expensive excavation. Working on understanding ethnic phenomena, which during the 1990s started with a critique of nationalism, I discovered that the intrusion of the political is not something that happened only during or in dictatorial political environment. It is present today, and not only in archaeology, in all sciences. Also, that political ideas are not imposed on scientists who have no choice, but are embraced by some of them who are not always aware of what they embrace. This explains why scientists from many disciplines promoted autonomy. And I have here a quotation from a paper published in 1938 by Robert K. Merton. As was to be expected, I have problems with projecting it. Sorry about that. So this is a quotation from Robert Merton. As before, I can see only a part of it. What am I doing wrong? Oh, I can see it. So one sentiment which is assimilated by the scientist from the very onset of his training pertains to the purity of science. Science must not suffer itself to become the handmaiden of theology or economy or state. The function of the sentiment is likewise to preserve the autonomy of science. For if such extra scientific criteria of the value of science as presumable consonance with religious doctrines or economic utility or political appropriateness are adopted, science becomes acceptable only insofar as it meets this criteria. In other words, as the pure science sentiment is eliminated, science becomes subject to the direct control of other institutional agencies and its place in society becomes increasingly uncertain. The persistent reputation by scientists of the application of utilitarian norms to their work has as its chief function the avoidance of this danger, which is particularly marked at the present time. A tacit recognition of this function may be the source of that possibly apocryphal toast at a dinner for scientists in Cambridge. To pure mathematics and may it never be of any use to anybody. This is very similar to what much later Pierre Bourdieu thought about the autonomy of scientific knowledge. The struggle for scientific authority, a particular kind of social capital which gives power over the constitutive mechanism of the field, can be reconverted into other forms of capital, owes its specificity to the fact that the producers tend to have no possible clients than their competitors. And the greater the autonomy of the field, the more this is so. This means that in a highly autonomous scientific field, a particular producer cannot expect recognition of the value of his product, reputation, prestige, authority, competence, and so on, from anyone except other producers, who, being his competitors, who are those least inclined to grant recognition without discussion and scrutiny. This is true de facto. Only scientists involved in the area have the means of symbolically appropriating his work and assessing its merits. Also, it is true de jure, the scientist who appeals to an authority outside the field cannot fail to incur discredit. Most scientists I know think like that we should preserve our autonomy. But during the last 3 decades, there is a growing number of voices, including social scientists, who see autonomy as an ideal which should be abandoned. And one of them is Helga Novotny, who was the president of the European Research Council between 2010 and 2013. She and her collaborators think that autonomy was characteristic for an obsolete way of doing scientific research, which they named Mode 1. They oppose to it Mode 2. And I have a quotation here from Helga Novotny. In Mode 2 knowledge, scientific peers can no longer be reliably identified because there is no longer a stable taxonomy of codified disciplines from which peers can be drawn. Then reductionist form of quality control cannot be easily applied to a much broader framed research, broadly framed research questions. The research game is being joined by more and more players, not simply by a wider and more eclectic range of producers, but also orchestrators, brokers, disseminators, and users. And third, most disturbingly, clear and unchallengeable criteria by which to determine quality may no longer be available. Instead, we must learn to live with multiple definitions of quality, a fact that seriously complicates, even compromises, the processes of discrimination, prioritization, and selectivity upon which policymakers and funding agencies have come to rely. I would not say like Helga Novotny and her collaborators that peers can no longer be identified, rather that it is pointless to identify them in what is described as mode 2, because knowledge is constructed both outside and inside the scientific world. Also, the multiple definitions of quality can survive only if they are backed by comparable forces. Otherwise, the definition of quality becomes the prerogative to impose it, and that is, it will be a political definition. Confronted, as the mode 2 promoters say, not simply with a wider and more eclectic range of producers, but also with orchestrators, brokers, disseminators, and users, among which I say we can safely assume nationalism is dominant. What will happen with the research of those few archaeologists who are promoting alternative ways of thinking about ethnic phenomena? Will they get financial support from those who control the resources? They have received support from private foundations and from European research institutions, but behind these institutions, there are social scientists employed by them. So they do that because there are those social scientists present, not because they take into account an eclectic range of stakeholders. I don't see any benefit coming out of this. Nationalism is a common language of politics and tends to be on the rise, being promoted by populist politicians. Despite the widespread opinion among archaeologists that nationalists can be easily eliminated from scientific research, this persistence is visible even in the work of archaeologists who claim to have eliminated it. In some cases, what is supposed to eliminate nationalism is either selected because of its compatibility with nationalist assumptions, or misunderstood because these assumptions are at work in the interpretation process, not in the disciplines from which anti-nationalist representations were taken. An influential voice contesting the ideal of disciplinary autonomy is that of Bruno Latour, who enjoys a wide recognition across the social sciences and the humanities, including archaeology, where the proponents of symmetrical archaeology have embraced some of his ways of thinking. He is known especially for his work on the production of scientific knowledge, for his actor network theory, appreciated by some archaeologists because it recognizes the agency of artifacts. He also known for his proposal that we live in a new geological era, the Anthropocene, marked by the impact of the human activities on the environment. A fair description of his views is not an easy task. I can explain why if anyone is interested. For now, I will say only that for Latour, other things are more important than the accurate presentation of scientific views. I will start with a presentation of what he thinks or used to think about scientific knowledge and politics with a puzzling ontological commitment, which introduces a significant asymmetry in what he declares to be a symmetrical approach. He presents networks as agentic entities. And many people think that these networks, in their complexity with human and non-human agents, are responsible for generating actions. But Latour ascribes representation, which he understands in a very political way, only to spokespersons. And these can be only human. They assemble the collective by inclusion and exclusion, and give directions and goals for the actions. There are many passages in Latour in which the existence of two kinds of actions, the mobilizing and the mobilized, is visible. For instance, none of the actants mobilized to secure an alliance stops acting on his behalf. The moment we turn our closest friends enroll themselves under other tactics. He uses the puppets or puppeteer metaphor, in which the only way to liberate the puppets, in my understanding, the network, is for the puppeteer to be a good puppeteer. Latour is a constructivist. We know what we know is from him a human construction, not a perception of reality. Scientific facts are constructed by the already mentioned networks of humans and non-humans. He perceives what is outside them either as hostile or rollable or irrelevant. Therefore, he claims that we need good constructions, good puppeteers, and strong networks supporting them. Networks are assembled in ways similar to those used by politicians in order to assemble their constituencies. Might becomes right. According to Latour, the scientific world produces objectivity, not truth. He thinks that truth can be found in politics, where it is a successful creation of something that would not exist without it, a temporally defined totality, a group. Anything that extends the work of the definition of and materialization of the group is true. Anything that interrupts it is false. Politics transforms the many into one by representation, and that can be achieved even by betrayal. I quote, "He who talks in the name of all must necessarily betray all those he represents. Otherwise, he will fail to obtain the transformation of the multitude into a unit." For Latour, the autonomy of the disciplines never existed. They were always political. Equally flawed for him is the idea of higher education autonomy. In 2009, he published in Le Monde an article titled "Autonomie que des crimes en commet en ton nom," or autonomy, how many crimes people commit invoking your name, in which he claims that the history of the sciences shows that scientific knowledge was always connected with what is outside it. And that central question is now, what connections can ensure a free production of the most advanced knowledge? He adds liberty to freedom as an important value, and towards the end of the paper, even autonomy. Achieving freedom, liberty, and autonomy by denying the value of autonomy is paradoxical, but this is nothing special for Latour. He rejects critiques by claiming that it was misunderstood and that his purpose is to get support for his ideas, not to present unassailable views. By bypassing the discussion on freedom and liberty, which only complicates things, now the key word in Latour's article is heteronomy. Disciplinary autonomy indicates capacity to make rules and to act according to them. Heteronomy is a condition in which the agents are determined from the outside. There is no doubt that such determinations exist, but also I think we should not embrace them. Confronted with the anti-science movement, with the Trump presidency and its rejection of the advice of scientists on climate change, Latour has altered his position. In an interview from 2017, he says he wants to rebuild trust in science and admits that in his writings about the construction of scientific knowledge, there was some juvenile enthusiasm. But he preserves his position on scientific autonomy and rejects reflexivity. To conclude this discussion about autonomy, I would say that indeed autonomy is limited, but that does not mean we should abandon it. Writing about subjectivity, Clifford Geertz has borrowed from Robert Solow an appropriate metaphor for abandoning something that works because it is less than perfect. I quote, "This is like saying that as a perfectly aseptic environment is impossible, one might as well conduct surgery in a sewer." I will stop here to take a 10 minutes break, and then we'll discuss. I hope my English is understandable.
Thank you very much, Alec. I really enjoyed your paper, or the first half of it, as it were. So 10 minutes break, everyone. Please reflect on the issue of scholarly academic autonomy in the present era. We're happy in this gathering to represent different stages in the life of a researcher. So we can all sort of share and contribute to this discussion, but let's, rather than sort of exchanging experiences, let's reflect on the politics behind the politics we're trained to ignore. Okay, so at 20 past we meet again. Thank you once again, Alec. In 10 minutes we meet again here. So we're back after the break. Thank you once again, Alec, for this stimulating discussion of the politics we are trained to ignore, or rather the question of autonomy in academic research and the extent to which we enjoy it, or we're supposed to enjoy it, or we should complain if we don't enjoy it. Can I ask anyone who's interested, who would like to contribute a question or an observation or a remark, to just raise their hand using the key below right and the reactions. So I would be able to see it. Bettina.
Yes, so thank you very much for that presentation, which really hit, I think, a lot of the themes I'm sure we're going to be hearing more than once this week. And in particular, I think for me, the message that even if objectivity is not attainable, it should still be aspired to. Your sort of quote about not at least voluntarily conducting surgery in a sewer, I think was appropriate there. My question to you is, you know, given the way in which the sort of trends are heading, how do we defend what we're attempting to do in our field? And it doesn't really matter if we're talking about sort of history or archaeology, if there's no sort of defense effectively for expertise. And this is something, because ultimately that is what you know you'd have to conclude if you were to argue that objectivity is de facto impossible to actually ever to ever achieve. And there have been a number of rather interesting studies specifically of that phenomenon, this sort of undermining of the notion of the expert, or that training is actually something, education you know, in a specific field is something that, you know, again, you know, as an elitist activity, it's something that isn't, shouldn't be effectively supported. It's all part of a larger, obviously, anti-intellectual movement, which you also referred to. So I guess my question to all of you is, what how can we mount an effective defense? Do you think we should mount an effective defense against that particular argument?
Alec?
Yeah, I think our main tool for defending scientific knowledge could be reflexivity. That is, could be a very good understanding of what we are doing. And unfortunately, in many disciplines, especially in archaeology, as I know it from Romania, people do not really know what they are doing because they are accustomed with accepting tradition about it and looking at what other people do. A discussion about goals of the discipline, about what we are doing when we are being scientists is missing, and this kind of this situation disables our possibilities to react properly to political intervention. I will give more details in the second part of the lecture about how this is happening. Also, there is no, at least not, there is not in Romania, there is no discourse, scientific discourse about what politicians should expect from us. In my view, they should expect from us to tell them what we think is true, not what they think. Because if we tell politicians what they think, we are becoming useless. If we tell them something else, that might be, and probably in most cases would be in disagreement with what they think, then we are doing our job, and it's a useful job.
Paulina?
Yes, if I may add, from not a perspective of archaeologists, but from a perspective who's not a politician, but works for politicians. What we, as public officers advising the politician, expect from the science field on numerous occasions is exactly what Professor Niculescu just said, being honest and openly saying how things are, not what the politicians want to think. And in order to clarify it, I think we need, there's nothing new to be invented, and the whole system of peer review and expecting certain general criteria approved by the academia to be met is the first and basic thing. And I completely disagree with this quote of Ms. From the European Research Council that said that there is no way to define, yes, that there is no way to define quality. Well, we are not living in any different times that we've lived before. And I think those mechanisms developed by universities for the past centuries are still in place and working. And I agree, it's very difficult to define objectivity, whereas it should still be something that we are aiming at, and it should still be the goal. But, and also the autonomy of academia, as it's protected and considered one of the most important elements of a modern university. Well, it should take into account that it should eliminate opportunism, and because you can't have both. You cannot be the favorite of the politicians and keep your and be 100% honest with them at the same time. This is how it works, and I can assure you that often we are looking, especially for people who would be open enough to say openly to politicians what they think, instead of trying to say things that they want to hear. I mean, I experience this a lot in my work, and especially that I work on this very sensitive field of remembrance policy. and it's sometimes very, very difficult. So that's all from me.
Yes, if scientists are willing to give up their own ideas and to present to you what they think politicians think, that happens because politics is inside the discipline and inside the universities. You cannot trust the hierarchies established, at least not in Romania, by the universities or by the research institutes. There are political considerations at work, and in the second part, I will show a part of this and how it happens. So it's a difficult task for politicians too, to get to sound scientific advice. And not only in archaeology, we live in this pandemic and you see how difficult it is. And medicine is much better than archaeology. We don't have a World Council of Archaeology to say in the name of a big group of archaeologists what is right and what is wrong.
Thank God for that.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. Seeing as a current, looking at the current situation and what the World Health Organization is doing. So it's difficult from both sides, and we have to work together at it. But I don't see much interest from the politicians, and I don't see much interest from the archaeologists either. Archaeologists already know how to ingratiate themselves with the politicians. So anything else looks like empty talk, pointless talk.
Yes, I would like to say that perhaps we should, as academic researchers, as scholars, we should stop being apologetic about the principles of our own academic discipline. I mean, relativism, I would call it they are academic principles, and they have been extremely helpful in the study of material culture or cultural studies. This is not to say that there's no objective truth or there's no way of distinguishing between right and wrong. In certain levels, there is objective truth, and in very certain levels, we can all in this virtual room agree about the usefulness and the validity and the integrity of a paper. And as Paulina said, this is where peer review is based. The fact that you can see the merits of a scholarly proposition. This has nothing to do with us also arguing that, okay, culture is relational. So we could discuss this perhaps a bit further, but first there's Anastasia and then Cosmin who would like to ask a question or make an observation. So Anastasia first.
I would just like to make a brief comment. I think that objectivity is a very general concept. And just Mr. Niculescu mentioned earlier, we are currently in the middle of a pandemic, and we are witnessing scientists on the one hand with their committees trying to implement some measurements in order to prevent the spreading of the pandemic. And on the other hand, we have the politicians who are trying to accept those measurements or maybe change them a little bit, because they are of course trying to satisfy their own interests, mainly their own interests. So because of the fact that I strongly believe that everything is politics, it's very difficult to find a balance. There is scientific objectivity, at least in a very high level, but I think that the political concept and what happens outside a university or a research center, what happens in society always needs to be taken into consideration.
Well, as Derrida said, everything is relative, and what I say is absolutely true. Anastasia, you're okay? You're done? Yeah. Cosmin?
I can actually pick up from Anastasia's theme, so also about objectivity. I was thinking, I don't know if you agree, so this is actually a comment, that since we are here at an archaeology conference, I was actually thinking regarding objectivity, that maybe archaeology is a privileged field a bit in humanities, in the sense that because of the nature of its sources, the very material, right, nature of the sources and of the work, you could more easily argue for something that is objective versus, for example, maybe history. I'm not sure, I'm just kind of thinking out loud now, because I'm thinking the discipline is also very technical in nature in a way, right? So if you, when you excavate something and you can present and say, here it is, whereas in history or even in our history, what I do more, it's much harder to do that. But I leave you to comment if you want. And my second comment is about the relation between politics and scholarly discipline. Again, a kind of a general comment, which is in Romania, especially, the context I know a bit better. I'm wondering if this kind of break between politics and the scholarly work isn't a survival strategy in a way from the part of scholars, academicians, professors, universities, in the sense that when you get involved in politics, you become exposed, right? You become, and especially in this very kind of, this very bad climate, in the unstable, I wanted to say, climate of politics in Romania, in the countries in the region, where there are rules changing with every government, there are objective strategies being radically changed from one government to the next. Then when you take a political stance, when you get somehow involved, or when you try to make a political point with your discipline, you become exposed to this instability. So I'm kind of thinking of the Romanian Academy or other institutes. They have been very comfortable sitting outside the political spheres and doing their job untroubled by all these other problems that politics brings in.
Yeah. About objectivity, I'm not the best person to speak about objectivity because I'm an archaeologist, not a philosopher, but nevertheless, I think the opposition between objectivity and subjectivity is not working, it's not helpful. We should not use these two words. We should use objectification, and that is what sciences do, try to present what they are doing to all the people interested to see that, and try to bring arguments in support of what they say. And subjectivity is objective, so to speak. That's why they do not work, the two concepts, as far as I can tell. In my country, people think that some people are objective because they are born like that. They are nice people and you can trust them. They will tell you what's objective. And there are some other bad people who are subjective and they say what seems to them true. And during the last 20 years, everybody is subjective. there is no objectivity left. There are no good people around, people we can trust. So this is really not working. The measure of the trust we can give to someone is what kind of arguments that person can bring. And if we look at the arguments, then we can look at where the arguments are coming from. Are they coming from a scientific discipline? If they are coming from a scientific discipline, what kind of discipline that is? Because scientific disciplines do not necessarily like each other. Some scientific disciplines claim that some other scientific disciplines should not exist. The situation is more complicated because disciplines are split among traditions of research, and they also exclude one another. I saw in a paper written by an American archaeologist, she was inviting her colleagues to imagine an archaeology without cultural anthropology. There is no need to do that because we have that in Romania and in most parts of Europe. So it's very difficult from someone who is outside to assess the value of a scientific statement, and it's even difficult from the inside. Especially in disciplines which are bigger as a number of researchers than archaeology. Then about Romanian scientists keeping away from politics, they say they are keeping away from politics. And the politicians say the same thing for obvious reasons. Researchers want to be seen as autonomous, and politicians want to have their decisions backed by science. If science is not autonomous, then what kind of backing are you getting from the scientists? So both parts are quite pleased with this situation. But the Romanian Academy, for instance, declares repeatedly that it is, well, some of its leaders declared repeatedly that they are apolitical, they have nothing to do with politics, and at the same time, they declare that the main goal of the Romanian Academy is national interest. So, and in several actions, it's very easy to see that the Romanian Academy has taken positions which are grounded in political attitudes. So I don't agree that researchers stay away from politics. Anyway, in Romania, people who get into politics seem to have better lives than the researchers. Anyway, they have much more money, nicer houses. So what seems unstable because the government's change is not that unstable because they belong to what they call the political class. And that means that resembles very much the communist nomenclatura. So once you are in, you stay and you enjoy the advantages of being. You can move from one party to another, change your opinions, that's not a problem, but you are in. Researchers are out. Unfortunately, many, some of them brilliant people who have studied abroad and made academic careers have entered politics. As we said about the people who joined the Communist Party, in the 1980s, they want to bring the system down from within. So they enter as intellectuals in politics, and they keep their academic positions. They are still professors. That's allowed in Romania, unfortunately. And so that shows how attractive the political field is for them and how unattractive is research. I mentioned the reaction of the department head, Tucson. In Romania, the people who do not enter politics are the stupid ones, not those who enter politics.
Okay, now we have Diana and then Natalia and then Oana. Perhaps we could try, if you're interested in this aspect, to weave into the discussion the question of sponsorship, of funding, which Alec mentioned, and perhaps we can discuss about how funding helps us construct archaeological and art historical knowledge in our region.
I will speak about that in the second part.
So, well, we can have an interlude. I mean, an overture. Diana.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alec. This was really thought-provoking. Actually, I want to take, to start from something you said earlier during your last, just now, and it is taking more seriously. I want to pay attention to two aspects. On the one hand, taking more seriously the politics of scholarship and science itself. It is not that politics is outside science. It's not that scientists simply comply or do not comply or defend their autonomy or interfere directly into the political realm. Just in brackets, the tradition in Southeastern Europe of the same persons serving as politicians and as scholars is a long-standing one. And one of the reasons being is that these people thought of themselves as endowed with a mission, that is translating their knowledge into action, into real decision-making, into real politics. And here I close this bracket. But what I want to pay attention to is that politics is inherent in scholarship itself. Bourdieu himself had pointed to the war between faculties, the war over definitions, the war over methodologies, and so on and so forth. So that and this is within certain disciplines and across disciplines. So this is the one, and actually during our conference during the last 2 days we discussed this from the point of view of archaeology relationship, the problematic relationship, asymmetrical relationship between classical archaeology and Byzantine archaeology. So, this is precisely indicative of the internal contestations, internal conflictual nature of the politics of scholarship itself. This is one aspect. And the other aspect, of course, is what we are witnessing over the last 20 years is the increasing democratization of the production of knowledge. We as experts are not anymore the lawgivers in these fields. People produce their own histories, they produce their own memories, they have the channels to do that via social networks, etc. We are not anymore in the monopolistic position to say what is true and what is not. And we have to face this situation. And combining these two issues, I think that the solution would be, and here I come back to the question that Bettina raised at the beginning, what do we do to sustain our relevance in this situation? Also having in mind what politicians would expect from us. Typically, politicians or funders, for that matter, want us to solve problems that cannot typically be solved by a single discipline. So we have to become accustomed to work in teams, because we cannot expect that any one of us would be able to master the methodological toolkit and conceptual framework of more than 2 disciplines at the very most. We know that even getting, professional in one discipline requires a lot. So the solution I see is our ability to work in multi and cross-disciplinary teams to solve problems, to solve questions that we might have. That would be, and then funders would look for us, and not the other way around. Hopefully.
They always look for us. They always.
Yes, they do, but at the same time with the tendency to impose their own agenda on us.
And that's always the case.
Usually packaged as outcomes. We want these outcomes
as deliverables. Perhaps we could hear from Natalia and Oana, and then Alec can close, because we're 10 minutes away from the break. Natalia?
Okay, I'll try to be brief, but I just wanted to make a comment, but at the same time, it's a topic that's open for discussion. I feel that regarding the autonomy of scientific field, archaeology, particularly, I feel that there is a lot of discrepancies between what is happening in academic realm of archaeology and what is happening in other archaeologies, in museums, in institutes for the protection, preventive archaeology field, etc. And in that sense, but at the same end, these are all the part of the process of knowledge production about the past. And I feel there is a lack of connection between what is happening in academia, thought, discussions, paradigm debates, etc., and the transfer of ideas into other archaeologies. Particularly, for example, at least I feel that something that's happening in Serbia at really low rate, because Ministry of Culture is financing one type of projects, Ministry of Scientific Research and Education are particularly financing the other archaeological projects, etc. So I feel that maybe this is some kind of field or the gap we should maybe talk a little bit more. And maybe I'm not right, but these are just my observations.
Thank you. And Oana?
Because Professor Niculescu talked about the Romanian situation, a little bit about the universities. It's very nice because we have in the legislation the principle of academic autonomy, that it's very important. And the idea that you have the freedom for the university to manage your situation, to even your curricula, everything is free. So why the politician put on strings the universities, for example, in Romania, and that same situation happens also in other countries by budget, because in Romania, the most of the university and the most of the budget comes from the government. So in the moment that you don't have the same position with the politicians, they are cutting your budget by night. And this is what happened in Romania 3 or 4 years ago with the 3 most important universities, because the director of the universities didn't, they weren't in the same position with the politicians, the budget was cut. So this reminds me of words that Sir Mortimer Wheeler said after the ending of the Second World War. And it was also about the archaeology and university and culture field. Before X money for the politician, let's educate them. And after that, ask money. So the question is, we have freedom, we have really freedom, and the involvement of the politicians, I think, exists, but not in the face. They have their own manners to manipulate everything. So this is the most dangerous, because it's not assumed free to say, okay, we do that, we do that, we do that. No, it's not on the view of everyone. This is the most dangerous. The idea that you have freedom, but you don't have freedom. And this is happening also with the archaeological excavation research and everything. The money has the power in the end. Thank you.
Okay, I would also suggest that there's also another danger of thinking that you desperately need freedom in order to be an academic researcher. That is something that you must achieve before you do research. That's something that perhaps is as scary as the other way around. But Alec, as there are no other raised hands, you have the last minutes before the lunch break.
Thank you. About how we should cooperate with the politicians, they have problems, and we should work together with them in order to find some solutions. I think this is wrong, because a scientist contacted by a politician, I have this problem, should receive, the politician should receive the following answer: that is your problem, not mine, because I'm a scientist and I cannot solve any problems outside my scientific world. So in order to help you, I can transform your problem in a scientific problem, because your problem is a political one. And generally, well, I would not say that a politician is based on a flawed perception of reality. So we cannot solve political problems. As far as I can think about this, we can solve only disciplinary problems. And of course, politics is inside. Unfortunately, I was not able to find anything written by Bourdieu about the relation between the politics outside and the politics inside. He wrote about the politics inside a lot. Also, I want to make a comment about what Natalia said. That's very important indeed. There is a disconnection between Romania between what happens in universities and what happens in the museums and what happens in the institutes. There is a fragmented landscape altogether. So museums and institutions have better connections with the Römisch-Germanische Kommission in Frankfurt than they have among themselves. That's a very interesting topic of discussion, but I didn't plan to cover it. About what Juana said, our freedom. We are not free. This is an ideological projection. We are at liberty to do some things and not other things. Free means being completely disconnected from any other human being, any other action, any other human institution. That is simply not possible. We use the word, maybe we should find another one, academic freedom, for instance, but academics are not free from their colleagues because the system would not work otherwise. The whole system is free, but depends on, as you have said, on getting money from the government. And the government may decide at one time that this particular kind of knowledge is useless and cut the funds. So what happens with the freedom? You are free, of course, you are still free to find another job. But this shows the limitations of the notion of freedom in this kind of discussion. So, as Dimitri said, we are in constant relationship with what is outside us. We cannot exist without. In a way, we are made by what's outside. We are made by education. We are, at least in Romania, we are too much accustomed to rely on our inner selves, what they could bring to the world. Our inner selves are from the outside. Not a pleasant thing to say, but unfortunately it seems true. So maybe one piece of work that should be done is to find new words. Autonomy, I think it's good because it conveys degrees of, it's possible to have more or less autonomy. To make some rules, not only. Freedom, I don't think it's very useful. Objectivity is not very useful. Objectification is very complicated to explain. And so maybe, I don't know, just being a good archaeologist or physicist is enough. It's not necessary to say I'm the objective one and the other ones are not. Also, this has another implication. The idea that the sciences are objective and the people who are outside the sciences are not. So we have a superiority from the start. So you should listen to us because we are objective and you are subjective. That's a very bad way of looking at the relationships between scientists and people who are not researchers. I hope I have answered your questions.
Right. Thank you. Technically, we're all to go to the break now.
Yes.
But Bettina would like to say something? Or
I just wanted to just briefly pick up on the point that Alec just made, because it actually relates directly to Cosmin's point. And it reminds me of a seminar I taught where for the first time actually ever, we had a biologist in the class. And what struck me about it was that everybody always assumes that other people's fields are more objective than their own. And what that means is that, in fact, of course, it's because you understand the limitations of your own field. We all are politically compromised in some way. It's just a question of not really seeing those nuances from the outside. That was the one comment.
Well, the grass is always greener, as they say, on the other side of the road.
Correct.
So on that note, thank you, everyone. This is a collective thank you from all of us, all of you, for this nice first session. So Diana, what do you think? 1 hour? We reconvene.
If you're happy with 1 hour lunch
Yeah.
break, that's fine with us as well.
Okay. Don't eat too much because otherwise,
yeah. Okay.
we can't work on a heavy stomach. So we reconvene at 2.
At 2, yeah. Well, in 1 hour, exactly.
In 1 hour. In 1 hour.
1 hour, yeah.